Greetings, everyone. I am uh, I am Crimson Luna, and I am here for you today with some Guilds of Ravnica pack opening. Uh, I've already today I've been at the pre-release event at my local game store, and I decided that I would buy a booster box, open it, and then play some Magic Arena right afterwards. So uh, there are some fun cards. There are lots of fun new mechanics and more fun cards in this set. And I've already opened like 9 of the boosters. Yeah, 9 of the booster packs from this display here. So I decided I would open the rest on stream. So that's 27 booster packs remaining. So let's get to it. And in the background I will be having the voice of all lore reading of Dominaria. I'm already listened to the first to the sixth episode of the Dominaria lore, so we're jumping into the seventh episode. So yeah, again, let's get to it. I will also turn off the microphone and come with inputs when that's needed.
This story is brought to your ears by all our fantastic supporters on Patreon. To get in on the action yourself with bloopers, extras, and the occasional early story, join us at patreon.com/voiceofallmtg. We'd like to thank our newest patrons, Sage Stafford and Raymond Vandenbroek, for already donating. For more stories or just a chat, visit voiceofallmtg.com. And now, Voice of All presents Return to Dominaria, Episode 7. Teferi walked out to the beach before dawn, to where he could see Zalfir reflected in the sunrise. He wasn't the only one. If you stood in the right place on the shoreline, if the weather was just right, balanced between overcast and bright sunlight, the ghost of Zalfir's coastline was visible. The translucent, gleaming towers and domes floated as if on clouds above the sea. It was a pilgrimage still made here by many inhabitants of Femeref and other parts of Jamura. Some came to honor ancestors lost when the rift occurred. Some came out of historical curiosity. This morning, several groups stood on the beach, solemn and silent, or talking animatedly as their children played in the surf. Others stood alone, like Teferi. He kept his distance, though the chances of him being recognized lessened with every century that passed. His own aging was now a slow process, but he had already long outlived his mortal enemies. The nearby town of Sewa had benefited from selling supplies and lodging to the Zalfir pilgrims and bustled with activity all year, though Teferi only came in the cooler months. He had been wandering for the past several years since the Mending, exploring Dominaria but never feeling the urge to settle down. When he had paid for his room in the hostel, the proprietor spoke to him.
It must be a trial, to be named after the destroyer of Zalfir.
Destroyer of Zalfir? That's a new one.
His explanation was well practiced.
It's an old family name, and no one wanted to offend my great-grandmother.
The proprietor had nodded sympathetically, and that had been that. As the day's heat rose with the sun, Teferi walked back up through the dunes, the wind pulling at his blue robes. He took the path to the road and passed more pilgrims headed toward the beach. Another group with children, 2 women, and a man walking alone, and nodded absently to them as he passed. The road ran along terraced fields and reservoirs, which gave way to garden plots and shade trees, and then went through the open gates in the town's outer wall. The market plaza bustled with activity, with stalls under colorful awnings selling all sorts of food and drinks and trinkets to the pilgrims and locals milling around. Most of the crowd had the dark or brown skin of Femeref or northern Jamura, but there were a few travelers from other parts of Dominaria in the crowd. Sewa was a good town to visit, and the oldest quarter had mosaics in its plazas and columned houses that reminded Teferi of his old home in Zalfir. Teferi wasn't sure why Zalfir had been so much on his mind since he'd given up his spark. Guilt, surely, but he knew he had done the right thing. Zalfir lived on, separate and protected from the forces that would have devastated it. Except lately that thought had begun to feel self-serving at best. It had been the right decision at the time. Now he was no longer sure.
It's not as if you can do anything about it.
He was weary with this internal argument. His Planeswalker spark had been needed to repair Shiv's time rift, to prevent devastating destruction. And he had no power now to return Zalfir. He found his way through the maze of streets, the high stone walls of houses to either side, passing the gates that led into their lush garden courts. As he entered the public fountain plaza, he saw two figures sitting on the low stone wall near the door of his hostel. Teferi kept walking, kept his face and body language neutral. Not many people outside of the new Mage Academy in Talaria West knew who he was anymore. After Shiv, he had avoided using magic, had moved from town to town in Jamura until he had outrun his reputation. No one here should know he was that Teferi, the Time Mage who had stolen Zalfir away. But he still had old enemies who wouldn't mind seeing him dead, and possibly new enemies. There were rumors of the Cabal gaining strength outside of Otaria, though no one was quite sure how or what had spurred their resurgence. As Teferi reached the hostel's covered patio, the two people sitting near the door stood up to confront him.
They say in the market that you're called Teferi.
They say a lot of things.
She was a very lovely woman, with strong features and a confident bearing. Her long braids had been tied back and piled atop her head, and she wore the loose pants, shirt, and hooded robe of a caravan drover. A whip with a well-worn handle hung from her belt. The man was broad and muscular, wearing a sword and a warrior's leather and metal jerkin, his dreadlocks ornamented with copper rings. From the darkness of their skin, they might be the children of Zalfir and families left behind when Teferi had created the Time Rift, but so were many inhabitants of Femeref. It didn't necessarily mean they had come here with an ancient family vendetta to kill him. The man smiled.
This is Subira, and I am Quinde.
You were expecting a visit from a man called Maquette.
Teferi kept his face polite, though he wasn't sure whether to be baffled or suspicious.
I'm sorry, you have the wrong Teferi. I wasn't expecting to see anyone named Maquette today, or any other day.
Subira lifted her brows, clearly skeptical.
You weren't.
No, I wasn't.
He leaned on his staff, intrigued. If this was the prelude to an assassination attempt, it was at least unique.
What is this about?
Maquette said he was coming to see you. That was the reason he was traveling here from Sukata.
I can't help what Maquette said.
Teferi was beginning to think it wasn't an assassination attempt after all, but an ordinary case of confused travelers misunderstanding one another.
You'll have to look for him elsewhere.
We don't need to look for him elsewhere. He's dead.
Teferi stared at her. Now he was more intrigued and much warier.
Would you tell me why you're here?
She exchanged an opaque glance with Quende.
I need to find out what happened at my caravan. Maquette was killed in our camp, and he said he was coming here to see someone called Teferi.
This was all very odd.
I swear to you that I didn't know this, Maquette.
He knew he should walk away, maybe even pack his few belongings and leave Sewa entirely, but his curiosity was piqued.
How was he killed?
By magic. Or at least, that's what the caravan's physician believes.
What sort of magic?
We are not sure. None of us is a mage. Are you?
Subira still watched him like a predator hoping for prey to break cover. Teferi decided not to answer that question.
It sounds like you need a magistrate.
The magistrates in this town look on the caravan drovers as scapegoats for every crime that happens while we're here. I don't want my people harassed. I want to find out who did this and turn the culprit over to the town judiciary myself.
Teferi could see her point.
I'm sorry. I don't know anything about this man, Maquette.
And if he was sensible, he would leave it at that. But he had never been sensible, especially when a mystery was concerned. And if this Maquette had really been coming to see him, he should find out why.
Why did the physician think that it was magic that killed him?
Because it's been 2 days and his body is not showing any sign of rot. I know the obvious solution is that he's still alive, but he's not breathing and he's cold as a stone.
This becomes more curious by the moment. Perhaps I could take a look.
Subira's brows lowered. Such an expression of deep suspicion tinged with irony shouldn't make her more beautiful, but somehow it did.
So, you are a mage then?
Quende studied him intently. That still wasn't a question he wanted to answer.
I'm a scholar. I know about many things, and you don't seem to have any other options unless you want to ask the magistrates for help.
A good point. Well, come on then.
Teferi followed Subira and Quende to the outskirts of the town, past the stables and cheaper hostels, and then outside the walls to the rocky flats where the caravan's tents and wagons stood. Other travelers, mostly groups of pilgrims too poor to afford lodging in Sewa, had clustered close to the caravan camp for safety. The bluffs that sheltered the town from the worst of the desert winds gave some protection to the flats, but it was not a place where anyone would want to spend much time.
How well did you know Maquette?
Not well. This was the first time he traveled on my caravan. Quende knew him better.
We had traveled together for a time before we joined up with the caravan to come here.
Teferi had assumed Quende and Subira owned the caravan together, and felt a jolt of relief that they were apparently recent acquaintances. And then he shook his head at himself.
Idiot.
He had no business of thinking of potential romantic attachments. Not now. And perhaps not for years yet, until people forgot he had ever existed. And that was a depressing thought, even for someone on his way to look at a dead man. He sighed deeply, and Subira threw him a quizzical look. She led the way through the camp to a tent that stood some distance away and was guarded by several caravan drovers.
We moved the body out here.
The other passengers insisted on it, afraid whatever he died of was catching.
It's a wise precaution. There are death spells intended to be spread to anyone who touches the victim.
Startled, Subira paused, holding up the tent flap.
Really?
The physician who examined him has come to no harm.
Well, not yet.
Teferi ducked inside the tent. The dead man lay on a carpet, covered by a cloth, and Teferi pulled it aside. Teferi had wondered if the physician was wrong, if the man was actually alive and in the grip of some strange but natural paralysis. Maybe even some poison that could appear to lower the temperature of the body and disguise any sign of life. But as Teferi checked the man's eyes and pulse, he saw that wasn't the case. He saw something else, too.
You and your physician were right. This isn't a natural death.
So, do you know him?
No, I've never seen him before. Someone has performed a spell or used a poison on your poor Maquette to not only steal the life from his body, but to suspend and preserve it. It's done in such a way as to make it look like time magic.
He pushed to his feet. Subira's eyes narrowed, and Quende's expression held a certain wary tension.
Was it?
If this was time magic, he would be suspended and seem to not move or breathe, but he would be alive. His body would still be warm, and when released, he would go on his way as if it never happened. Time magic also takes effort to maintain and can't be held indefinitely. So, if I was going to kill a man, I certainly wouldn't use time magic, at least not in that way. I know you think I did this, that's why you came looking for me.
Subira glanced at Quende, who was still watching Teferi like a man prepared to defend himself at any moment.
Did you kill him?
Luckily for our burgeoning friendship, I did not.
Quende relaxed a little, no longer expecting an attack. Subira's gaze was thoughtful, and it was hard to tell if she believed Teferi's denial or not.
Maquette told Quende you were a time mage. I wasn't sure I believed him.
Neither was I. But it seemed to explain this.
Teferi looked down at Maquette again, frowning. Someone who knew who Teferi was had obviously sent Maquette on this journey, but then what was the point of killing him before he completed it?
Was Maquette collateral damage, or was the plot aimed at both of us?
Is that all you've got to say?
I always have plenty to say. It's one of my faults. Did he tell you why he wanted to see me?
No, and I didn't ask.
He was still skeptical, though something in his bearing made Teferi think that while he certainly believed that Teferi was a powerful time mage, he didn't believe Teferi had killed Maquette.
It was none of my business, and I had no idea it would become important later.
Did you search his belongings?
Not yet.
Subira turned to lift the tent flap and gestured to one of the drovers.
Akime! Go and bring Maquette's baggage, please.
I'll get it. It's in my tent.
Quende ducked out.
Thank you!
She turned back to Teferi, and they contemplated each other in silence.
I was certain you were the culprit, so there was no need to look for clues. Like a character in a story.
And now you know I'm not the culprit?
Let's say I'm open to other theories.
What other theories would those be?
Teferi was honestly curious. At the hostel, Subira had seemed more aggressively suspicious than Quende, but she clearly had an open mind. Maybe Quende had been just as suspicious, but better at hiding his real feelings. Subira folded her arms, studying him.
That Maquette was sent here to kill you.
That was far too close to the theory that Teferi was inclined toward. He hesitated, not sure what to say. There wasn't much reason for anyone to kill the pilgrim scholar of Zalfir that Teferi had been pretending to be for the past several years, even if he was a time mage.
I think you're not just a Teferi, but the Teferi.
They eyed each other for a long moment. Subira didn't seem appalled by the idea that she was facing the destroyer of Zalfir, but it was hard to tell.
If I am that Teferi, let's say that something being sent to kill me is not an unusual occurrence.
But would they send only one assassin? I think you're far more dangerous than that.
Teferi kept his smile light. As much as he wanted to see it as flirting, he knew she was too straightforward for that and was simply speaking her mind.
Your confidence in me is gratifying.
I know a dangerous man when I see one.
She knew he was dangerous, but she hadn't expressed any contempt or dismay.
It doesn't bother you, knowing who I am?
Subira shrugged.
My family were always travelers. None were in Zalfir when it left. I was never raised to think of Zalfir as a birthright that was stolen from me. I've also read about what the Phyrexian invasion was like, and seen the remnants. I can understand why you did it. They say you don't have the power to bring it back. That must be hard.
Her simple acceptance of those facts made the knot of guilt in his heart loosen.
When I created the Zalfir Rift, I was so certain I was right. That I was saving my home from a horror that would utterly destroy it. Now I question my decision every day, but I have no power to change what I did.
It was surprisingly easy to make the painful admission. He met her calm gaze and felt no urge to look away. This was the first time he had had an honest conversation with anyone in years, and it was almost making him dizzy. Subira nodded, accepting his confidence without comment.
So we know you have enemies. But if Maquette was coming here to kill you, then who killed him?
A good question.
Teferi paced the tent, trying to concentrate on the problem at hand.
Perhaps Maquette discovers a plan to kill me. He travels here to warn me, but the mage behind the plan kills him and makes it appear that I did it. Then you go to the magistrate, I'm accused of a crime.
And you meekly go into custody until you can prove your innocence.
No, I wouldn't let them arrest me. Being confined in a cell is not something.
Teferi decided not to finish that thought. It wasn't the same as being trapped in a time bubble, but it wasn't something he wanted to experience again. He would never let himself be imprisoned, and anyone who tried it would find out just how dangerous he was.
But the plan didn't work. It makes me wonder what whoever did this is thinking now, or doing now.
Subira!
Subira shoved the canvas aside and ran out. Teferi ducked out after her and stopped in his tracks.
Uh-oh.
Rolling toward them out of the desert flats was a sandstorm. The wall of sand and dust loomed so large it was like a giant ocean wave, or an avalanche of rock tumbling off a mountain. It would hit the caravan with the same impact. Sewa, partially protected by the bluffs and its stone walls, would probably survive. What the storm would do to anyone caught outside, and the livestock and gardens and fields and everything needed to survive the next season, was a nightmare. Teferi strode toward where Subira and the drovers stood frozen in horror. It was too late to run, though from the shouts and screams from the tents and wagons, some were attempting it.
What is that? An illusion?
No, it's real.
Teferi could feel it in the air, with a weight and electricity an illusion could never duplicate.
But not a coincidence.
A powerful mage could raise this out of nothing. A not-so-powerful but knowledgeable mage could raise it with several different spells over a period of days, nudging various winds and air pressure systems. It's a complicated process.
Which you can explain later, if we survive. Can you stop its time? Make it freeze.
It was too large to diffuse.
No, I'm gonna have to think of something else.
He had already thought of something else. He just didn't know if he could make it work. He strode forward, away from the others, to the edge of the shelf of rock. He lifted his staff to give himself an anchor and hoped he had estimated the distance correctly. He cast the spell to stop time for a bubble of air 10 feet in front of him. Inside the bubble, drifting dust motes froze in place. Gathering every scrap of power he still had, Teferi stretched the bubble and made it longer, wider, higher, extending it seaward toward the bluffs that formed a natural windbreak for the town, and outward to shield the caravan grounds, then up as high as he could stretch it. He made sure to keep it at an angle, using the sharp edges of the rock shelves as a guide. Logic said this should work. Teferi just hoped logic was right. An instant later, the leading edge of the storm struck the time bubble and slid sideways along it, out toward the open desert. The wind howled in confusion, and sand blasted against the bubble. Teferi held it as long as he could, and then longer, darkness creeping in on the edges of his vision. The sheer effort made his body feel as light as gossamer, as if his feet floated above the ground. He wasn't sure if that was really happening or if it was what fainting felt like. He thought it might actually be a feint. And then he hit the ground, and the bubble collapsed. Teferi braced himself for an unpleasant death. Being skinned and scraped raw by sand was not a good end to his life as an aging, former planeswalking immortal. But the wind that flowed over him was no stronger than a normal, harsh desert wind, and the sand it carried was abrasive, but not fatally so. It died away to fitful, dust-filled gusts. Subira leaned over him and shook his shoulder.
Are you all right?
Teferi took a breath to answer and choked on sand. Subira hauled him up into a sitting position and pounded him on the back until he could breathe. He wiped watering eyes and lifted his head to see the caravan grounds still intact, though tents, wagons, and agitated animals were covered with a layer of dust. People staggered around, coughing and flailing, and those who had fled slowly returned, clearly amazed at their survival. The town looked in better shape, where confused inhabitants gathered on the rooftops and in the windows and doorways of the houses built back against the cliffs. As Subira helped Teferi to his feet, her drover Akime ran to help. As they reached the tent, another drover ran up.
They're coming from the town. A crowd of magistrates. They say someone here brought the storm.
Who brought the storm? Just tell me!
Him. Teferi.
That's a lie. It was Teferi who saved us. We saw him with our own eyes. Why call a storm only to half kill himself stopping it?
Subira looked toward the town gate, where the approaching crowd was just visible.
This is the work of whoever is trying to kill you.
She turned toward the drovers.
Who went to town? Who brought these people?
No one! We've all been here. Only Kwende. He went to arrange for Maket's body to be taken away.
Kwende? Oh, for the love of...
Kwende, who told you Maquette came here to look for me? Who said Maquette told him I was a time mage?
It was clear as glass now. Maquette had probably been an innocent victim, a pilgrim traveling here who Kwende had befriended as part of his plot. Once Teferi had been taken by the magistrates and their mages, the sandstorm would have already destroyed the evidence in the caravan camp, and the witnesses who might have contradicted whatever story Kwende meant to tell. Subira swore in angry realization.
I've been a fool! He's lied to me all along!
She turned to Teferi.
Freeze time and run!
I can't. Not now.
Teferi was too exhausted to freeze more than a cloud of angry gnats. He had to recover before he could use his power again.
Then hide!
Teferi hesitated. Running away felt like... well, running away.
But...
Hurry, you idiot!
So Teferi ran. He dodged through the tents, keeping the bulk of the wagons and the camel pens between himself and the group of magistrates. He headed toward the rocky hills at the far end of Sewa's wall. He would have to hide until nightfall, then find some way to get provisions before he left. The sword swing came out of nowhere, and Teferi flung himself sideways. He hit the ground and rolled. Kwende leapt out from between the tents. He moved so fast he was like a blur. Teferi flung up a hand and accelerated time around the sword blade that drove down toward his chest. As it struck him, it shattered into pieces. The steel rusted through. Kwende staggered, overbalanced, and Teferi scrambled away. He grabbed his fallen staff and managed to shove himself upright. Kwende recovered and drew two long knives, their blades gleaming with crystal. Teferi held his staff out like a man about to cast a devastating time spell, but he knew he had maybe one or two minor efforts left in him before he collapsed entirely.
Why are you doing this?
It was the only way to get to you, traitor, destroyer.
Kwende surged forward. Teferi managed to slow time a little, so Kwende's blindingly fast assault turned into a slow, menacing pace. Teferi backed away.
You brought the storm.
Kwende's grin was more like a grim.
So I've done 1/3 of all the packs I have. I have 18 packs left, so that's 9 packs. So instead of going showing like all of them one by one, because of this webcam being so bad, I'm gonna show like the most notable ones that I find in the packs, most likely just the rares. And in case I get like a shock land, or if I get a legendary, and foils. So I will continue, and this will go much faster, and we can keep listening to the lore of Dominaria by Voice of All.
grimace as he fought Teferi's waning power.
I hired a mage to make the spells that stirred the winds, and to make the death magic poison, so Maquette would look as if he had been killed by a time mage.
Who are you?
If he was going to die, he wanted to know why.
My ancestor was Magetta the Lion. He was in Kipamu when you destroyed it.
Teferi's heart sank. He shook his head.
The general. It wasn't destroyed.
Liar!
Quende's muscles bulged as he fought the time spell, and Teferi knew he couldn't hold on much longer. Then a whip cracked, wrapped around Quende's arm, and jerked him aside. Subira stood with Akime and her other drovers behind her, all armed.
Leave him alone, Quende! He didn't kill Maquette, and he didn't raise the storm. You did that! You are the murderer!
Because he was too powerful to kill. I had to weaken him first. You don't understand.
Weaken him? And kill half the town and everyone in my caravan camp to do it? And what about Maquette? Your precious Magetta would be proud of that, would he? We've traveled together, Quende, and I know this isn't worthy of you.
Maquette was a thief and a murderer. I would never kill an innocent.
But you are willing to sacrifice everyone in the caravan camp to trap Teferi.
I knew he would turn the storm and save them.
You knew he would save them? But you still want to kill him!
He is the destroyer of Zalfir! I've been told my whole life that my blood must have vengeance on his.
Teferi grimaced. Quende had been raised on retribution and blood feud for Zalfir, for the loss of people he had never known, a place he had never seen. He thought killing Teferi was his only way to freedom from that suffocating legacy.
Zalfir is not destroyed. Go to the beach with the other pilgrims and look at it. It's still there. And if I could return it, I'd give my life to do it right this instant. But my life isn't enough. I don't have the power anymore. It's impossible.
Subira, the magistrates are coming. We need to go.
Get my wagon. I'll go ahead with the ferry and meet you at our next stop.
No, I won't let you take him away. I've waited too long.
Subira dropped her whip and strode forward until she stood almost chest to chest with Quende.
Then kill me. That's the only way you'll stop me. You're either a murderer or you're not, Quende. Choose.
Subira.
He was terrified Quende would drive his knife into her heart, and Teferi hadn't the power to stop him.
Don't risk yourself. Quende, please don't kill her.
She ignored him. Quende stared at her as the moments stretched. And then he slowly stepped back. He backed away, and the drovers moved to get between him and Subira. Then Akime drove up with Subira's wagon. Quende stood there as Subira shoved Teferi up onto the driver's box, and she climbed up to take the reins from Akime.
Why are you doing this for him?
I'm doing it for the both of you, you idiot. Now go away and do something worthwhile.
Akime jumped down as the wagon rolled away.
You could have been killed.
He trembled with exhaustion, his powers depleted.
You're welcome. The least you can do is come with my caravan and keep the thieves and raiders and other threats off us. A time mage should be good at that.
Teferi slumped back against the seat, giving the thought serious consideration. It was tempting. If he had to keep wandering, it would be good to do it with company. Company who he wouldn't have to lie to about who he really was.
For a while. I'm not one to settle down. Nyambi, be careful!
Nyambi was running in the court again, chasing the dragonflies that clustered around the lilies in the fountain pond. The big house under the acacia trees was spacious and comfortable, but old, and the flagstones paving the court were uneven. The cracks were just the right shape to catch unwary little feet. A few years ago, Subira had found someone else to run her caravan, and she had settled down with Teferi in this town near one of their old routes, long enough to have Nyambi. She had gone back to her caravan now, visiting regularly as Teferi raised their daughter. Niambi bolted for the fountain, but her sandal caught on a loose stone and she started to fall. Teferi cast the spell out of pure instinct, and Niambi froze in midair. Teferi froze for an instant too, startled at himself. He obviously hadn't lost any of his fighting reflexes, even after so long without using his magic. He stepped forward and circled Niambi, carefully examining her angle and trajectory, making sure there wasn't anything sharp or hard in her path. When he let her fall, she would land on the grass, possibly get a bruise or two, and hopefully learn a lesson about running in her sandals on the court's uneven flagstones. There was no other choice, really. But he thought how once there had been a choice, between Zalfir's devastation and removing it from the world, preserving it and trapping it. Thinking of Niambi preserved and trapped like a bone in amber turned his stomach. He couldn't keep her safe at the cost of her freedom and growth. It seemed obvious. It hadn't been obvious with Zalfir, when there was no guarantee that anything of Zalfir would have survived the Phyrexians. But so much of Dominaria had survived, if not intact, then with enough of itself left to grow anew and evolve. Teferi let his breath out. He had known for a long time that if he could return Zalfir, he would do it. But no amount of soul-searching would give him that power.
But some other sort of searching might.
Urza had certainly created powerful artifacts that might help. It was worth looking into. But for now, he decided a compromise was best. He stepped around in front of Niambi and released the spell. As time moved around her again, she landed in her father's arms and laughed with delight. Thank you for listening to this production of Voice of All. As listener-supported entertainment, we rely on you not just for the voices of the characters, but also to keep us going and growing. If you enjoyed what you heard, please support us by rating and reviewing us on iTunes, or following us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play, or just plain sharing with your friends. You can also support us financially on Patreon for exclusive perks. Return to Dominaria was written by Martha Wells. The podcast was produced and edited by Gin Dokeshi, with sound editing by Grace Noir. This week's story featured the voice talents of Auntie Rivet, Michael Lanier, Mithrilda, Corbin Condon, Sarah Shepard, and Ben Lyon. Voice of All is unofficial fan content, permitted under the Wizards of the Coast fan content policy. Magic the Gathering is copyright Wizards of the Coast. Thanks so much for listening. You'll have a fantastic day.
Well, as we are done with that episode, we will start up the next episode in just a moment. And then we'll just continue with the pack opening. And then we will go into playing some Magic Arena. So, yeah, let's just continue then.
This story is brought to your ears by all our fantastic supporters on Patreon. To get in on the action yourself with bloopers, extras, and the occasional early story, join us at patreon.com/voiceofallmtg. We'd like to thank our newest patron, James Cook, for already donating. For more stories or just to chat, visit voiceofallmtg.com. And now, Voice of All presents Perspectives, Episode 7 of the Chronicle of Bolas. Niva gripped her spear, leaning on it so she would not collapse.
Sorry about that. It seems like I made a little bit of a mistake.
This story...
Let's see. I put on the wrong episode. So we just listened to 7 of the Return to Dominaria. So now it is time for episode 8.
Is brought to your ears by all our fantastic supporters on Patreon. To get in on the action yourself with bloopers.
And there we go. Gotta start it and just gonna let it go.
We'd like to thank our newest patron, Connor Forbes, for already donating. For more stories or just a chat, visit voiceofallmtg.com. And now, Voice of All presents Return to Dominaria, Episode 8. Chandra walked across the plains to Regatha. She stepped through a storm of fire into existence again on the rocky ground below the broad stone steps of Carol Keep. The sun was setting over the mountains, the smoke from the nearest volcano turning the sky a brilliant red streaked with orange. The heat of the day sank into her bones, a comfort after the dank cold of the Dominarian swamp. She took a deep breath of warm air, tinged with a crackling energy like the aftermath of a lightning strike, and felt all her tense muscles relax. She sighed and scrubbed at her face.
I know it didn't look like it, Gideon, but I have a plan.
She wasn't running away. Nissa hadn't run away either.
You didn't have to leave like that. Leave me.
Her chest tightened at the memory of Nissa's furious expression. Nissa hadn't even given Chandra the chance to come with her. She knew how much danger Zendikar could be in from Nicol Bolas, how much Nissa wanted to be there to help repair the damage.
But she acted like she never wanted to see me again.
Chandra knew she sounded like an angry, jealous child. Well, that was part of the problem, wasn't it?
You're not strong enough for this. You need to fix that.
From inside the monastery, voices echoed in an evening chant. She had arrived at just the right time. The monks would finish the ceremony and then sit down to dinner. It was a perfect opportunity. She climbed the stairs silently, slipped inside the shadowy hall, and took the first corridor. She reached an open court and had to duck down behind a stone bench as 2 robed figures hurried past. Novices, distracted by their studies and running late. Something Chandra had to deal with during her brief time as abbot. She waited until the sound of their steps faded, and then quickly crossed the court. It wasn't like anything would happen if they found her. Chandra just didn't want to argue about her plans. And they would see she was upset, know something had happened. She would have to explain. She didn't want to think about what had happened on Amonkhet, much less explain it. She needed more firepower, better focus and accuracy to do real damage to Nicol Bolas. To get it, she had to be more in touch with her true self. Or at least, that was what they taught at Carol Keep. It was just that Chandra had never had any luck to do that. But for once, she had stumbled on the perfect opportunity. Just after Nissa disappeared, Chandra had noticed fresh traces of a powerful pyromancer's ether trail on Dominaria. Possibly Jaya Ballard's ether trail. The Fire Mage Planeswalker hadn't been seen for longer than Chandra had been alive, and everyone at Carol Keep thought she was dead. But Jaya might be on Dominaria now, and if anyone could teach Chandra the trick to quickly getting in touch with herself and increasing her power, it had to be her. Once past the court, she was in the lesser-used area of the keep, and it was easy to hurry along empty passages to the stairway leading down. She reached the dark hall at the bottom and released a small ball of fire from her open hand. It moved up to hover near the vaulted ceiling, lighting the chamber. This was where the monastery kept its sacred relics. But there was only one thing here Chandra was interested in. She crossed the room to the plinth where Jaya's goggles sat. The light gold metal was just a little discolored, but the leather strap and buckle showed obvious wear.
She'll want these back, and they'll prove I come from Carol Keep.
The gift would get Jaya to listen to her long enough for Chandra to explain how important the fight against Nicol Bolas was. And it wasn't stealing when you were giving something back to the person who had originally owned it. As she reached for the goggles, a voice spoke up behind her.
Chandra, what are you doing?
Chandra snatched the goggles, clasping them to her chest as she spun around. It was Mother Luti, staring at her from the doorway.
That's not what it looks like!
Of all the people who could have caught Chandra in the act, Luti was the absolute worst. She didn't have an official rank in the monastery, but she was old and had been living here off and on forever, and everyone respected her, and she was always trying to get Chandra to learn things Chandra didn't have time for. Luti came toward her, her expression more bemused than anything else.
I have no idea what it looks like. What are you doing here? Why do you want those?
I found Jaya Ballard.
Luti froze for an instant, eyes wide. The shadows from Chandra's firelight etched even deeper lines around her mouth and eyes, darkened her long, silver-gray hair.
You...
I think she's on Dominaria. We went there after Amonkhet. It was terrible. Bolas nearly killed us all and we failed.
Chandra lifted the goggles.
But if I can find Jaya, I'm going to give her these. Ask her to teach me the secrets and tricks I need to know. I have to do this, Luti. I need more power to fight Nicol Bolas. Otherwise, we're going to lose. He's going to kill me and all my friends, and then...
She waved a hand, and the fireball floating overhead danced wildly, mirroring her agitation.
There won't be anybody left to stop him.
Chandra, you don't need Jaya. You should be concentrating on helping your friends if they're in so much danger.
You don't know what I need!
All the frustration and fear of the hopeless battle against Bolas, of Gideon taking Liliana's side, of Nissa's abrupt departure. It all boiled up at once.
You weren't there! Stop giving me advice I don't need and don't want!
Chandra!
But Chandra had already turned, ghostly fire flaring up around her as she stepped out of the plane. This time, she knew exactly what she needed to do. Chandra followed the fading traces of what she hoped was Jaya's ether trail and stepped back into Dominaria. Cool air washed over her. She stood in an alley surrounded by heavy stone buildings with crenellations and shuttered windows. She walked out of the shade into a sunny plaza where people dressed in rough leather and muted colors hurried past. The sun warmed the stone cobbles underfoot, and it only felt cool because she had just been in Carol Keep's oven-like warmth. The place was Argivia, the capital city of New Argive, some distance west of Benalia and Arona. All the passers-by seemed nervous, and lots of people were hauling baskets of food, bags, barrels, and ceramic jars, taking it all farther into the city. Everyone seemed to be talking in loud, worried voices. Chandra ducked out of the way of a herd of goats and bumped into a woman carrying a basket. The woman stumbled and the basket tipped, spilling apples onto the cobblestones.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Chandra flung herself down and scrambled to pick them up.
It's all right.
The woman knelt down to scoop the fruit back into the basket.
If this is the worst thing that happens today, we'll both be lucky, eh?
Fortunately, the crowd wasn't panicked and parted around Chandra and the woman like they were rocks in a stream.
What's all this about?
The city was clearly preparing for something, but it was orderly and almost practiced, like everyone was used to it.
You haven't heard?
The woman dumped the last of the apples into the basket, and Chandra helped her lift it as they both stood.
I'm traveling. I just got here.
As an explanation, it wasn't the best, but fortunately the woman was in too much of a hurry to question her further.
Oh, it's the kobolds of the Care Ridges again. And that horrible god dragon up there is Prosh. They're going to attack the city, but Steward Baird's got a troop of soldiers and a powerful pyromancer to settle them. Hopefully this time it'll be permanent.
A powerful pyromancer? Do you know who it is?
No, I never heard a name. If you're meaning to move on, you should leave soon. They're gonna lock down the gates until the troop gets back.
If the steward wasn't coming back until he finished off the kobold threat, there was no telling how long that would take. Chandra had to go now.
Thank you!
She plunged away through the crowd. The city gates were still open, and quite a few travelers and traders were leaving, not wanting to risk getting stuck in the city. Some enterprising peddlers had set up shop there, and Chandra was able to buy travel supplies and a map before she started out. All the other horses and wagons and foot traffic were taking the northern road. Chandra was the only one going south toward the ridges. As she walked, she could see signs that a large, mounted force had recently passed this way. Hopefully, she could catch up to the steward's party before the battle. If Jaya was really there, Chandra could volunteer to help, which would make an even better introduction than just charging up to Jaya and handing her the goggles.
This is a great plan. And it's getting better all the time.
A few days later, Chandra was starting to doubt a little. It was late afternoon, and she had left the farm country near the city as the road gradually climbed into forested hills. Now she was walking through heavy forest, the road much rougher than it had been near the city. At least the weather had been good enough that she hadn't needed her tent, but she was worried about what would happen if she ran out of food. She still saw signs of the Argivian troops' passage, and had stumbled over a couple of their old campsites, but they were obviously moving much faster than she was. She had the growing feeling she had probably already missed the battle. She told herself it didn't matter. As long as she found Jaya, everything would go according to plan. She was trudging along, trying to dig the last piece of fruit out of her pack, when she spotted something lying beside the road. At first, she thought it was more debris from the Argivians, a discarded or forgotten bedroll lying on the tree roots at the edge of the road. But a few steps closer, she saw the outstretched arm and realized it was a dead body. Chandra stopped, startled. All around her, the birdsong was silent. The road curved here to follow the shoulder of a hill, and she couldn't see too far ahead. She ran up to the body. It was a man wearing the light armor of a scout and a tabard with the symbol of the Steward of Argive that she had seen in the city. From the axe wounds in his neck and shoulder, he was definitely dead. But when she touched his arm, his flesh was only just cool.
This didn't happen very long ago.
Maybe she hadn't missed the battle after all. Though it was weird that she couldn't hear.
Here we go.
Chandra stepped off the road onto the thick loam between the trees. Heading in the direction of the crash, she found a second dead body. Another Argivian scout, this one killed by crossbow bolts to the back. She kept moving, following the sounds of scraping and pounding. She reached the top of a rise and caught movement out of the corner of her eye. She stopped and squinted, trying to pinpoint it. Then she saw the movement again.
There you are.
Someone, or something, had just pushed the trunk of a fallen tree across the road where it curved around at the top of the hill.
Now that looks like an ambush.
There wasn't a lot of brush between the towering trees, but she still couldn't see who was up there moving around. She finally found a vantage point by climbing up among the trees at the top of a low hill. From there, she saw the kobolds. At least a dozen worked on each side of the road, short, gaunt figures dressed in a variety of metal and leather armor and helmets, heavily armed with axes, spears, and swords. They were building a barricade across the road, probably meant to halt the Argivian troop and give the kobolds a chance to attack. The one Chandra guessed was the leader stood on a boulder, waving a sword and exhorting the others.
We will kill the Argivians for the glory of Prosh.
Prosh loves us. We honor Prosh. As the kobold leader continued to rant about Prosh's greatness, Chandra snorted. Since Prosh was a dragon, she was pretty sure he didn't care about the kobolds at all, except for how tasty they were. The kobolds must have surprised the scouts. They knew the steward's force was heading back this way and would be here any moment. It was all really annoying. If not for the kobolds, Chandra might be meeting Jaya right now. Then 2 more kobolds rushed down through the trees from the south. They ran up to the leader and spoke, but it was too quiet for Chandra to hear. The leader turned and jumped off the boulder, hissing and gesturing at the others.
The Argivians draw near. Be ready!
As the kobolds on the road ran for hiding places, Chandra eased away from the clearing. She was going to break up this ambush. She scrambled backward and sat up to turn around, and found herself looking down at 2 kobolds carefully creeping up the hill behind her.
Kill her for Prosh!
They both lifted heavy axes and charged.
Oh, damn it.
There went any chance of being stealthy and clever enough to impress Jaya, who was hopefully nearby. She would have to do this the loud, fiery way. Chandra sent a fireball into the first kobold's chest, and he tumbled back down the hill, screeching. The second one lunged at just the wrong moment, and her fireball hit his axe instead of his body. He flailed backward as his axe handle turned to ash. Chandra took the opportunity to jump up and kick him in the face. He somersaulted down the hill to join his friend.
Don't burn down the forest.
She bolted through the trees, headed toward the section of road where the kobolds had laid their ambush. The steward's party would be arriving any moment. Crossbow bolts landed in the ground near her feet. She spun and spotted 3 kobolds running at her from the trees. She incinerated the rest of the bolts in midair, and the crossbows for good measure, and then charged out onto the road just above the point where the kobolds' tree trunks blocked it. Chandra drew on her power and held out her hands toward the makeshift barrier. One clean blast down the middle, she told herself, focused and controlled.
Just like Mother Lucy always tells you, and you never listen.
She sent the burst of fire streaking toward the logs. It hit dead center and slammed through all 3 trunks. Through smoke and burning fragments, Chandra caught a glimpse of the road past the barricade, but she couldn't spot anyone approaching. She needed to make the opening bigger, to make sure the Argivians wouldn't be trapped. She sent another burst of fire, but then a lot of screaming kobolds charged her. She drove the first charge back with a stream of fire, fighting the urge to just blast them all. The last thing she wanted to do was set fire to the forest, endangering the nearby Argivians and whatever else lived here. But her temper raged as the kobolds charged again. A crossbow bolt tore through her shirt sleeve, narrowly missing her. The carefully targeted stream of fire turned into a wild blast that fried the half-dozen kobolds in its path. Fortunately, she had been facing north, away from the troop of Argivians who charged through the shattered barricade behind her at the same moment. The kobolds tried to regroup to fight the Argivians, but it quickly turned into a rout. Chandra stood at the side of the road and spent a few minutes telling herself that she had been completely in control and had meant to send that wild blast and knew it was in the right direction. And then she gave up and just hoped that Jaya hadn't seen it. Scanning the mounted Argivians, Chandra didn't see anyone who looked like she might be Jaya. She must be further back in the troop, riding with the steward, maybe. Finally, the few surviving kobolds fled, and Chandra headed up toward the remains of the barricade, where the Argivian supply wagons were waiting. Some soldiers had started to haul the remains of the barricade away, while others shoveled dirt over the still smoldering debris. A young woman hurried up to her.
Steward Baird would like to thank you.
Oh, right.
Chandra followed her, her heart pounding a little with the thought of finally meeting Jaya. But when the soldier led her to where the steward stood beside his horse, there was no one who looked like Jaya. Chandra managed to contain herself and accept Baird's formal thanks without looking too impatient.
I was looking for the pyromancer who's supposed to be traveling with you. Is her name Jaya Ballard?
Yes, that is her, but she left our force in the ridges.
Left?
Chandra could hardly react. It was a relief that she had been right all along and Jaya really had been here, and it was horribly disappointing that she wasn't here now.
Please don't let her have planes walked away already.
She said she had come to Argivia looking for a friend of hers, and when she heard the dragon we were going to fight was on the way, she offered me her services.
That was a relief.
So she's going farther south?
Baird pointed up the road.
To the Avimea Forest, I believe. It's just off the coast, on the far side of the Care Ridges.
That was on Chandra's map. This road connected with the trails over the ridges and ran through to the coast across from the island of Yavimaya.
Thank you. I should go. I want to try and catch up with her as soon as I can.
Baird nodded to her and gestured toward the supply wagons.
If you mean to follow her, please accept some food and supplies from us. It's the least we can do in return for your help.
Chandra started toward the wagons, then thought of one last question.
Oh, steward, who is the friend Jaya is looking for?
I'm not certain. She said it was someone who had been gone a long time.
Chandra traveled for 5 days, out of the forest and past the end of the road, up into the rocky slopes and scrub brush of the ridges. She was careful with her food, though the Argivian supply master had told her that she should have enough to reach the coast, and she refilled her water skin whenever the road crossed a stream. The walk gave her plenty of time to think about what she was going to say to Jaya, rehearsing it over and over. It also gave her plenty of time to worry about Gideon and the others, and to miss Nissa. But she was sure she was doing the right thing. Going up what her map assured her was the last ridge, the trail became harder to see, and Chandra found herself climbing more than walking. Finally, she reached the top and stopped, breathing hard. The sea spread out below from a beach at the bottom of the ridge, the water serene under blue sky and white clouds. Directly across from her, maybe only a mile or two away, was another coast, so thickly covered with trees that the shore looked like a nearly solid wall of intense green. This had to be Yavimaya. Mist floated around shapes that might be small mountains or hills, but from her high vantage point on the ridge, she couldn't see any sign that anyone lived here. No indication of paths or roads along its shore, no mark of civilization at all.
How am I going to find...
Suddenly, a whole section of huge trees on an inland hillside rippled and trembled, and then waved back and forth, as if a sudden wind shook them like children's toys. Carried on the breeze, Chandra distantly heard metallic banging and clanging, and something roaring faintly.
I guess that answers that question.
Chandra started down the ridge, moving as fast as she could. Whatever was going on over there, it was a good place to start looking for Jaya. Below, in a cove at the bottom of the ridge, she found a small fishing village. An obliging, though confused fisherman ferried her across the strait, and Chandra waded ashore to start her trek into Yavimaya. Chandra had thought the forest near the coast was thick, but the inland trees were huge, with heavy spiraling roots arching up above the ground. The leafy canopies turned the sunlight into green shadow, but there were colorful flowers everywhere. Fortunately, the ferny plants on the forest floor were low and easy to sprint through. Chandra drew close to the noise until she reached the edge of a low, possibly unnatural valley. It was nearly round, and the bottom was filled with a big, newly dug crater, surrounded by piles of disturbed earth. And the people who had done the digging were still there. At first, Chandra thought she was looking at muscular giants in armor,
Oh, right. I get it.
She'd been traveling alone for too long, because these were obviously automatons. They were each around 20 feet high, with scoops for hands and big, blocky heads. As she watched, they stopped digging and climbed out of the crater to face the shadows of the forest. Chandra hesitated, but they couldn't be after her. They were facing the wrong way. And then she saw the forest on the far side of the crater was moving. The leaves and branches tossed like a harsh wind had passed through them. Creatures that looked like animated trees walked out of the shadows into the valley.
No, wait. Those are animated trees.
They dragged themselves along, clots of dirt falling from their root bundles. Some were big, with trunks divided almost like legs, but others were smaller and crept out of the underbrush, moving their lower branches in a way that was far too giant spider-like for Chandra's comfort. She wasn't sure what was about to happen, if it was a battle, a standoff, or a meeting. And then suddenly a tree surged forward, so fast Chandra yelped involuntarily. It leapt on the nearest automaton and ripped it apart. Chandra gasped in astonishment as metal parts flew into the air and rained down on the dirt. The other automatons rushed to attack, and the enraged trees lunged forward to grapple with them. She ran toward the battle instinctively, but at the bottom of the hill she slid to a halt. She had no idea which side to take. She didn't want to end up accidentally fighting against Jaya's friends. That would be a huge disaster. And then a tree broke off from the battle and charged her, branches stabbing at her wildly. Reacting instinctively, Chandra flung a firebolt. It hit the tree dead on, and its branches caught fire. But even in flames, it still came at her, bark and branches disintegrating, as if desperate to kill her. She hit it with another burst of fire, just as a smaller, human-sized automaton reached her side.
Take care. They will attack any movement.
More trees rolled over the hill like giant, angry tumbleweeds, headed toward the automatons. 3 veered off toward Chandra, accelerating as they got closer.
What are these things?
The automaton braced to meet the charge.
They're animated trees, created and sent by Multani.
Not people, then.
She drew on her power and blasted the rapidly approaching trees, aiming for the trunks. If they weren't people, she wasn't going to restrain herself. And then the automaton lunged past her. Chandra whipped around and saw a tree had crept up and was just about to slam its branches down on them. The automaton punched it in the trunk over and over again and splintered the heavy wood into fragments. More trees slammed into the line of large automatons, and Chandra sprinted forward to get behind them. 2 trees turned away from the automatons to rush her, and Chandra blasted them out of her way. She reached a spot of higher ground where she had a better angle, and sent a stream of fire down the whole row of trees. They didn't seem to realize they were on fire, and blindly shoved past each other to get to the automatons, spreading the blaze. Chandra blasted the last few stragglers, and moved back down to ground level. Finally, she and the surviving automatons stood surrounded by piles of punched-apart trees and smoldering wood. Chandra rubbed soot off her face and dusted her gloves. She looked around and spotted the smaller automaton who had saved her. He was shoving a fallen tree away from the edge of the excavation. She jogged over to him. He straightened up and looked down at her. At that point, Chandra realized this couldn't be an automaton. His head and face were more human-like than the others, more mobile.
Thank you for your help.
You're welcome. Thanks for getting that one that snuck up on me.
She thought it might take a little time to get used to his metal features. She could tell he was making expressions. They were just hard for her to read.
You said somebody named Multani sent them after you?
It belatedly occurred to Chandra that Multani might be the friend Jaya had come to meet, in which case Chandra had really screwed up her plan.
Multani is an elemental and has been in a semi-conscious state, recovering from terrible injuries. Animating these trees and sending them to attack us is an instinctive defensive action.
That was a relief. Jaya probably hadn't come to meet somebody who was mostly unconscious.
I'm Chandra. I've been looking for Jaya Ballard, and the steward of Argive told me she was going to Yavimaya to look for a friend who was gone for a long time. You don't know who that is, do you?
The metal person tilted his head, and it was hard to tell, but Chandra thought his expression might be ironic.
I am Karn, and I am someone who has been gone for a long time.
Is Jaya here?
Well, fancy meeting me here.
Chandra spun around. Mother Luti stood there, wearing a leather and metal jerkin over her red robes.
What's she doing on Dominaria? Hold it. How is she on Dominaria? She's not a planeswalker. I don't think she was a planeswalker. You can't be. How did...
Mother Luti lifted a brow and pointed to Jaya's goggles hanging from Chandra's belt.
I believe those are mine.
Thank you for listening to this production of Voice of All. As listener-supported entertainment, we rely on you not just for the voices of the characters, but also to keep us going and growing. If you enjoyed what you heard, please support us by rating and reviewing us on iTunes, or following us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play, or just plain sharing with your friends. You can also support us financially on Patreon for exclusive perks. Return to Dominaria was written by Martha Wells. The podcast was produced and edited by Gin Dookeshi, with sound editing by Grace Noir. This week's story featured the voice talents of Pio, Inra Zyro, Carrie Schultens, Michael Lanier, Eric Bright, Ash Thurman, Muppet, and Adam Bennett. Voice of All is unofficial fan content, permitted under the Wizards of the Coast fan content policy. Magic the Gathering is copyright Wizards of the Coast. Thank y'all so much for listening. Y'all have a great day.
Well done. We are now done with all the packs. All the piles. Yeah, all the cards have been sorted into their respective colors. And I've started taking out the rares and all the foils and separating them into each of their own piles. So because I also bought a booster box there, I also got this card. It's an Impervious Great Worm. It's a creature card, it's a worm, it's mythic, it has Convoke, and it's indestructible. It costs 7 generic mana and 3 green. It's a 16/16, but yeah, with no like real evasion or like any trample, it's gonna be very like unused. Also the high cost. And because I was at the pre-release, there will also be 12 extra rares that I have here. So lucky for me, I got Trostani Discordance. Also, I got two boosters in prize pool, so I actually got 14 extra rares, not counting the foil rares. But yeah, Trostani Discordant. It's a Celestia card, 3 generic, 1 green, 1 white. Legendary creature Dryad, mythic. Other creatures you control get +1/+1. When Trostani Discordant enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 white soldier creature tokens with lifelink. At the beginning of your end step, each player gains control of all creatures they own. So that's a fun Dryad. We also opened Amara, another Celestia card, 1 green and 1 white. Amara, Soul of the Accord. It's a legendary creature, elf cleric. It is rare. Whenever Amara, Soul of the Accord, becomes tapped, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. I totally forgot that. Trostani is a 1/4, 1 power 4 toughness. Amara is a 2/2, 2 power and 2 toughness. We also got Lazav. He is a very special Dimir agent, basically. Lazav the Multifarious. He costs 1 blue and 1 black. Legendary creature Shapeshifter. He's a mythic. Whenever Lazav the Multifarious enters the battlefield, surveil 1. So surveil is one of the new mechanics in Guilds of Ravnica. Basically, it's a half of a scry and 1/2 of a scry and 1/2 of the explore trigger. So you look at the top card of your library, just like when you scry, and then you may put it back on top, or you may put it in your graveyard, like with explore. He also has an activated ability. The cost is X. Lazav the Multifarious becomes a copy of target creature card in your graveyard with converted mana cost X, except its name is Lazav the Multifarious. It's a legendary in addition to its other types, and it has this ability. So you can make him into anything you have in your graveyard. He will become that creature, but he will still be Lazav, and he will still be able to become a different creature. We also opened now Niv Mizzet. Niv Mizzet Parun. He is, yeah, we all know about the guild leader of the Izzet Guild. He costs 3 blue and 3 red. So you need you need 6 colors to cast him. Obviously, he's a legendary dragon. I forgot that about Lazav. He's a 1/3. But yeah, Niv Mizzet is a legendary dragon wizard, as usual, and he's a rare. This spell can't be countered, and he has flying. Whenever you draw a card, Niv Mizzet Parun deals 1 damage to any target. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card, and he is a 5/5. So from the prize pool of one of the games, one of the pre-release games I was playing it, I got Aurelia, Exemplar of Justice. She costs 2 generic, 1 red, and 1 white. She is Boros, obviously. She is a legendary creature, Angel. She is also mythic rare. She has flying and she has Mentor. Mentor is a reoccurring effect that we've had before, like like with Lazav. Surveil is a new thing, new ability kind of thing, but Boros has Mentor, which is old. So yeah, for those who don't know, Mentor, whenever this creature attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature with lesser power. So Aurelia is kind of special. Her ability is a trigger ability. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose up to 1 target creature you control. Until end of turn, that creature gets +2 and +0. It gains trample if it's red, and it gains vigilance if it's white. So I'm definitely gonna put that in like a yeah, in a Boros type deck. And that's like the most important things that I got. There are some other things that I will read up when I have found them. I can like explain some of the other mechanics. That's what I was gonna. That was what I meant about it. I'm gonna explain. I can explain some of the other mechanics of this. We have the new Iset mechanic, which is Jumpstart. You can pay the mana cost and discard a card from your hand to jumpstart, to activate the jumpstart ability of a card in your graveyard. That is, if it has jumpstart. It seems like I got some good Celestia cards here. Quite a few of them as well, but not many enough. But yeah, you will find jumpstart cards in both red and blue. But first I'm gonna go through all the specific guild colored cards, which reminds me I can probably find one here. Jumpstart. There we go. Beacon Bolt. Beacon Bolt deals damage to target creature equal to the total number of instant and sorcery cards you own in exile and in graveyard. And it has Jumpstart. You may cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying its other costs. Then exile this card. So it's a nice way to get some value, like double value out of your spells. And it's kind of like no, it's not buyback. I forgot the name of that mechanic, but the other, a flashback. It's almost like flashback, but it's not like a separate ability. If a jumpstart card had like two abilities or two different triggers that you could choose between, you could still choose either one of them with jumpstart. So with Golgari we have a mechanic called Undergrowth, which basically, it all depends on the card itself as well, but they have an effect based on how many creatures are in your graveyard. Like for instance, Rhizome Lurcher is a fungus zombie from this set, is a common. Undergrowth. Rhizome Lurcher enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So if you're gonna like hate on the Undergrowth deck, on a Golgari deck, you should just exile their graveyard. So I was also lucky enough on the pre-release to get a chromatic lantern. Other than that, we just have a bunch of lockets. Don't know what I would say is the best one, or the best thing, lockets or key runes. But everyone knows that draw is the best mechanic in Magic, come on. So, we also got 2 shocklands, and I traded to me another one. So, yeah, shocklands are back. It's the same shocklands basically, so it's like Overgrown Tomb, it's Sacred Foundry, and those other shocklands. Now I finally have some shocklands. So, let's see. There's, yeah, I talked about Surveil. Mentor we went through, and we already know that. In Celestia we have Convoke again. And we all know what Convoke does, right? Just in case you all forgot. Convoke. Your creatures can help cast this spell. Each creature you tap while casting this spell pays for 1 generic or 1 mana of that creature's color. So that's a nice way to like cast your spells without having the mana to cast them. You can just tap down your creatures. And then what have I forgotten now? So we have 5 guilds. Golgari. Is it Celestia? Boros and Dimir. Golgari, Undergrowth. Celestia, Convoke. Boros, Mentor. Dimir has Surveil. And Iset has Jumpstart. So yeah, that's all of them. We will soon be going into Magic the Gathering Arena because we were at a pre-release. We will have a code for a sealed event, a free sealed event on Magic the Gathering Arena. So first I'm just gonna separate the rares here, because we did get some alright ones, and we did get some foils. And then we can keep listening to the Magic the Gathering Dominaria lore. I'm mainly just waiting for Guilds of Ravnica lore to come out, so that they can voice it, because it hasn't even come out yet, so they can't even voice it yet. So Dominaria is what we can listen to in the meantime. They also have like they started with Innistrad well about 2 years ago, and now they're doing Dominaria, and well, they've done Dominaria, and now they're doing the Magic 19. They are actually doing the Unbowed and Core Set 19. So just waiting for Guilds of Ravnica to come out, because I reckon that Guilds of Ravnica is gonna be very interesting to read, and if you like it that way, listen to them. I really like listening to it like an audiobook, because then I can in the meantime I can play Magic the Gathering while I'm doing it. I can sort my cards, I can just generally I can Magic the Gathering. So another thing that's returned is split cards. Like we had before, these cards here, split cards. But we don't have them fused, so you can only cast one of them, but that also makes one of them viable for two kinds of decks. For example, this one, I could play this in a Golgari deck. Actually, three kinds of deck. I could play this in a Golgari deck, I could play it in a Celestia deck, or I could play it in a Dimir deck. Just because of this, it costs one Golgari. So it's either black or green. Another thing that's with this set is also the fact that they have white soldier tokens that have lifelink. There's also the green-white elf knight tokens. And they have vigilance. So I've basically been at my local game store today for 12 hours playing Magic the Gathering. Now I'm coming wait. 2 hours ago I came back home and I'm gonna continue and I was I'm gonna continue with Magic the Gathering, and well, here I am continuing with Magic the Gathering, opening packs, and soon going to play Magic the Gathering Arena. It has been fun today, so that's good. I'm currently working on making some commander decks and perhaps trying to get people to start playing Brawl. For those who don't know what Brawl is a mix between Commander and Standard. You have 60 cards. One card is your Commander. That's the card that you would build the deck around. The deck can only be in the color identity of your Commander. It's only standard legal cards. There is no commander damage, and you would in a 2-player game you would start at 25 life, and in a multiplayer game you start at 30 life. And as it's a half commander format, it also is singleton, so all cards there are unique except for basic. So you can't run two of the same card. The same thing goes with non-basic lands. You can't run more than one of that non-basic land. Just like Commander or EDH. Some like to call it EDH, some like to call it Commander, some call it something else, I would guess. Everyone has their own little name for it really. So one of the things that surprised me a little bit, but not too much, is the fact that among cats and an hour of devastation are now out of standard. The same with Eder Revolt and Kaladesh, but I didn't think it was like 2 sets are going out. But then again, we do have Dominaria and Dominaria and Core 19. But that just means that Kaladesh and Eder Revolt has been in standard for a little longer than they should have. Personally, I am not a huge fan of Kaladesh and Eder Revolt. They're just not my style. So one of the cool things right here with the Guilds of Ravnica, or as we like to call it, because we're returning back to Ravnica, the return to Ravnica, is with the different cards we have the watermark for the guilds that they basically belong in. So here we see the Niv-Mizzet, we see the Izzet Guild logo. And so on and so on. And yeah, lots of text so you can't see it too well. Boros logo in the watermark. Here's the Golgari logo right there in the watermark. Very like subtle, but also very notable. So we can go through some of these cards just really quickly. So I got 2 risk factors. It's an instant, it costs 2 generic, 1 red. Target opponent may have risk factor, deal 4 damage to them. If that player doesn't, you draw 3 cards. It also has jump start, so you can cast it once and more from your graveyard. There's the Arclight Phoenix. Costs 3 generic and 1 red. It's a Phoenix, obviously. It has flying and haste. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you cast 3 or more instant or sorceries, 3 or more instant and sorcery spells this turn, return Arclight Phoenix from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if you cast like 3 instants and sorceries before combat, this comes back on the beginning of combat, and then because it has haste, you can just punch them. Just gotta simplify everything, because I was sure maybe I had 2 Phoenixes. I guess not. Oh well. We have a Runaway Steamkin. It's an elemental. When it costs 1 generic and 1 red. Whenever you cast a red spell, if Runaway Steamkin has fewer than 3 +1/+1 counters on it, put a +1/+1 counter on Runaway Steamkin. Remove 3 +1/+1 counters from Runaway Steamkin and add 3 red mana to your mana pool. Also got 2 Erratic Cyclops. It's a Cyclops Shaman. It costs 3 generic and 1 red. It has Trample. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Erratic Cyclops gets +X and +0 until the end of turn, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. So yeah, that's always fun. We got here. Let's see, what should we do next? Blue, black, white, or green? Oh yeah, we're not completely done with red. We also got in one of our pre-release packs the Legion War Boss. It's a 1 red and 2 generic mana cost Goblin Soldier. It has Mentor, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 red Goblin creature token. That token gains haste until the end of turn and attacks this combat if able. So you just play that and oh, there's a Goblin token attacking you in the face. Yeah, the other pre-release card I got is a multicolored one, a Boros color. But we'll come back to that. So, in white, we got a citywide bust. And this is a nice little removal. It costs 2 white and 1 generic sorcery card. Destroy all creatures with toughness 4 or greater. Really good for clearing out those big pesky targets. We also have Dawn of Hope. Whenever you gain Dawn of Hope is 1 white and 1 generic. It's an enchantment. Whenever you gain life, you may pay 2 generic mana. If you do, draw a card. You can also pay 1 white and 3 generic. Create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. So it's not just a spell, an enchantment that just when you gain 1 life you may pay 2. It also creates the reason that you would gain a life. You get the soldiers. We also got this Light of the Legion Angel. It costs 2 white and 4 generic. It has flying and mentor, and when Legion of Light dies, put a +1/+1 counter on each white creature you control. So that's very nice in a white deck. So just to move on quickly, we are going with green now. We have this, the Beast Whisperer. 2 green, 2 generic, Elf Druid. Whenever you cast a creature card, draw a card. Or whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Very simple, very generic. Next one. Vivid Revival. It's a sorcery. It costs 1 green, 4 generic. Return up to 3 target multicolored cards from your graveyard to your hand. Exile Vivid Revival. So there's a way to get your multicolored creatures or spells back from your graveyard to your hand. And it doesn't have to be creatures, it can be anything. It can be an instant or sorcery or whatever. Or enchantment or anything. We got a Hatchery Spider. It's 2 green, 5 generic spider creature. It has reach and it has undergrowth. When you cast this spell, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of creatures in your graveyard. You may put a green permanent card with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. That is not bad. Not bad at all, but you would have to have some creature cards in your graveyard. So we're now coming into blue. We have Drowned Secrets. 1 blue, 1 generic. It's an enchantment. Whenever you cast a blue spell, target player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So that's gonna work very well with like mill decks. Because it happens every time you cast a blue spell. It's not like the first time you cast a blue spell on this turn. We also have a Mission Briefing, 2 blue mana. It's an instant. Surveil 2, then choose an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. You may cast that card this turn. If that card would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So you can Surveil 2 if there's like good instant or sorcery you want to cast there. You can put it into your graveyard and then cast it through Mission Briefing. We also have Quasi-Duplicate, 2 blue mana and 1 generic. It's a sorcery card. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. It also has Jumpstart. So now we're getting into black, where there is a little more, but it only seems that way because there's 2 of them that I got 2 of. So we have the Midnight Reaper. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. It costs 1 black and 2 generic mana. It's a zombie knight. And it's a 3/2. I know I've like forgotten to tell the power and toughness of some of these. And I know it's very difficult to see with this camera right here. But such is life. We have here a Blood Operative, 2 black, 1 generic mana. It's a vampire assassin. It has lifelink, and when Blood Operative enters the battlefield, you may exile target card from a graveyard. Whenever you surveil, if Blood Operative is in your graveyard, you may pay 3 life. If you do, return Blood Operative to your hand. And then we have Ritual of Soot, 2 black, 2 generic. It's a sorcery. Destroy all creatures with converted mana cost 3 or less. Nice little removal, very straightforward. If your opponent has like lots of small and cheap creatures, you can just cast that and all your problems will be gone. Especially if such problems would be lots and lots of rats. Rat colonies everywhere. Sorry, I just had a game earlier where someone had rat colonies. Luckily I won against them. But that was like yesterday. So here's the last black rare. We have a Mausoleum Secrets. It's 1 black and 1 generic. It's an instant and undergrowth. Search your library for a black card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. So that's very nice. It's a tutor. It's a tutor for as long, for how much you have of creatures in your graveyard. And it's just 2 mana to cast it. We also got one of the more valuable cards in this set. We have gotten an assassination trophy. So I've heard lots about this card. It's supposed to be worth quite a bit, especially if you get it in foil. It's like $100 in foil. So let's do a quick search. Let's check. Very simple. We can check TCG player. We can go check Card Kingdom if that's your wish. So let's see. Assassins. Assassins. Trophy. And then we go to Guilds of Ravnica, and there we go. It's $24. So yeah, we're just gonna find ourselves. Let's see, where did I put those? I'm gonna find well, actually, I'm gonna find a couple of sleeves. Gonna find an inner sleeve. Side loading is the best inner sleeves. Then we're gonna find a normal sleeve. I would choose something better than Ultra Pro, but this is what I have right now. And there we go. Very valuable card. Just, yeah, $24.18. The pre-release, yeah, the pre-release foil of it, or yeah, the pre-release of it, is around 80 bucks actually. So that would have been a nice thing to get, but at least we got a normal one. That's value right there. We could also slowly go through all the rest, but I don't know if people would want that. I also need to check how people are doing. So, a card that we all know, well, most of us anyways, a card that's been with us for a long time now. We have the Chromatic Lantern. Chromatic Lantern is very, very well used. It's very much used in like formats like EDH or Commander or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it's very much used there. So next up we have the multicolored cards, the guild cards. We only got one rare Golgari card, except for like the Shockland. We have Charnel Troll. Charnel Troll. It has trample. It also costs 1 green, 1 black, and 1 generic. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on Charnel Troll. Otherwise, sacrifice it. So if you don't have any creature cards in your graveyard, you have to sacrifice it. Or like if you don't want to exile a card in your graveyard. You can also pay 1 black and 1 green to discard a creature card to put a +1/+1 counter on it. So you can just keep feeding it +1/+1 counters and just keep feeding it +1/+1 counters when you have to exile those creatures from your graveyard. We also have a split card here. Assure or Assemble. So the Assure, it costs 2 Celestia. That's 2 You can pay either green, 2 green, or 2 white, or you can pay 1 white and 1 green. So Assure is the first part of it. It's an instant put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That creature gains indestructible until end of turn. And the other part, Assemble, 1 white, 1 green, 4 generic. Create 3 2/2 green white elf knights. Creature tokens. That's with vigilance. We also have March of the Multitudes, 2 white, 1 green, and X. March, yeah. It also has Convoke, and it's an instant spell. Create X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens with lifelink. And you can convoke it, so you can tap down your creatures to make even more. So next card is Camaraderie. It's a sorcery card for 1 white, 1 green, and 4 generic. You gain X life and draw X cards, where X is the number of creatures you control. Creatures you control get +1/+1 until the end of turn. The next card we have in Celestia is Night of Autumn, and I got 2 of it. So it's a Dryad Knight. It costs 1 white, 1 green, and 1 generic. When Night of Autumn enters the battlefield, choose 1. You can either put 2 1/1 counters on Night of Autumn, you can destroy target artifact or enchantment, or you can gain 4 life. So that's probably gonna get used. People are probably gonna like try to get that. I don't know. I don't play standard, so I have no idea. Next card we have. Now we're out of Celestia and we're going into Boros. So the next card is Deafening Clarion. There you can see my other pre-release card. It is a sorcery for 1 white and 1 red. You can choose 1 or both of the effects that it has. Deafening Clarion deals 3 damage to each creature, or creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn. So I use that quite a lot to, remove some of the opponent's creatures. Another card is one of my favorites from the Boros. We have Swiftblade Vindicator. It costs 1 red and 1 white. It's a human soldier. It has double strike, vigilance, and trample, and it's a 1/1. We also have now in Dimir, which is the next one we're going to. Sadly didn't get any Atrata. I was really hoping for Atrata. We got Unmoored Ego, 1 black, 1 blue, and 1 generic mana. It's a sorcery card. Choose a card name. Search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for up to 4 cards with that name and exile them. That player shuffles their library, then draws a card for each card exiled from their hand this way. So, as I said, I don't know standard, but from the sound of it, that's gonna get used quite a lot. We can also check real quickly what the value of it is. Unmoored Ego. It's not much yet, So the normal one, I have two of it. I have one normal and one foil. The normal one is in roughly $2. The other one is in $9. So there's a little bit of value. So at least the foil one I can put in a sleeve. As I said, I will go through all of them with with TCG player, or like with a thing to check the value. So the next card we have is Thief of Sanity. Thief of Sanity costs 1 black, 1 blue and 1 generic. It's a spectre and it's flying. It has the mechanic that whenever Thief of Sanity deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 3 cards of that player's library, exile one of them face down, then put the rest into their graveyard. For as long as that card remains exiled, you may look at it, you may cast it, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. So even if Thief of Sanity is removed from the battlefield and all that, you can still cast that card. As it states there on the card, for as long as that card remains exiled. So they would have to use some sort of like pull it out of exile. So that's gonna be fun. Its currently worth is $1.69, $1.69. Foil is almost $9, so that would have been nice to get. We got going out of Dimir and into Izzet. We have Expansion Explosion. Izzet. First ability on it, or first spell that's on that split card, is Expansion. It costs 2 Izzet. It's an instant. Copy target instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 4 or less. You may choose new targets for the copy. Very simple, very straightforward. The other Explosion, 2 red, 2 blue, and X. Explosion deals X damage to any target, and then target player draws X cards. So you could choose someone else to like draw cards. Typically you would choose yourself unless you're trying to mill out your opponent by having them draw. And then the last card here is 1000-Year Storm. It is an enchantment for 1 red and 1 blue and 4 generic. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it for each other instant and sorcery spell you cast before it this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. Its current value isn't too high, but in foil it's like 10 times as high. But it is going down in value. So yeah, that was the rares. Is there anything else really? Not really. Oh yeah, I forgot one rare. We have Guild Mages Forum. It's a rare land. We actually have a rare land. So, Guild Mages Forum. You can tap it to add 1 colorless, and you can pay 1 and tap it to add 1 mana of any color. If that mana is spent on a multicolored creature spell, that creature enters the battle with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. So that's just very, very simple. It's not even a gate, so it doesn't synergize much with the rest of the cards that's in here. Because some of the cards here are actually like very gate yeah, focused. We have a where is it? There. Gatekeeper Gargoyle. It's a 6 mana cost artifact creature. Gargoyle. It's flying, as it's a gargoyle. Gatekeeper Gargoyle enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each gate you control. And it's normally a 3/3 for 6 mana. So unless you have guild gates, it's actually not really worth having in your deck. So that's all I got from this pack opening. Gonna just slowly go through all of the cards. See their worth and their value. Of course, there's barely any. And then the ones that actually have value, like we have here, a Assassin's Trophy. That's a great card. Actually, that's knights, not knights. So Knights of Autumn. They're actually like $4 each, so that's good. I could probably wait, what did I actually see? Deafening Clarion foil. This is pre-release foil, so that's a little bit different, but still some value. Whoopsie. We also have obviously the Shocklands. They always have value. And now Shocklands are also gonna be used in standard and not just in modern. So they are gonna be going probably. I also just like to get my legendary creatures in sleeves. Legendary creatures just have a special place in my heart, especially when it's Niv Mizzet, and especially when it's someone like Aurelia. So this is Exemplar of Justice. She is $11 right now, so that is value. I didn't think she would be that high, but great. We have Niv Mizzet, Parun. he's not as much because he probably won't get played in standard. His cost is just too high, especially with the fact that you have to have colors to cast him. There is no generic mana for him. And then we have Lazav, the multifarious. He's $6, so that's actually value. As a foil, he's 27. We have Amara, Soul of the Accord. Not worth anything. Worth jack shit, as they call it. Then we also, lastly, have Trostani. That is Trostani Discordance. Not much. So the most valuable cards here, in order, we have Aurelia and then we have Lazav. Trostani Discordant was worth more than if Misset. Let's check those shock lands. We have Overgrown Tomb. Guilds of Ravnica. 674. Return to Ravnica is 873. The original Ravnica is 1556. And of course we have the Expedition, that's 93. Wow. And that is why people opened Zendikar. Battle for Zendikar. Because of those expeditions. We also have Sacred Foundry. So that's 674 for the Overgrown Tomb, and it's 731 for the Foundry. So that's good. Then let's just keep going. Camaraderie. Magic the Gathering. Nothing. Basically. It's too expensive, so it's probably not gonna be played. I would probably think the same for March of the Multitudes. There we go. And I was somewhat wrong and somewhat right. It's 520. Yeah, 523. We have Assure Assemble. Yeah, Assure Assemble. Nothing. Charnel Troll. Nothing. Then we get to the Chromatic Lantern. Probably not gonna get played much in standard, or maybe it's 3 mana for a mana rock that can be easily destroyed with destroy target artifacts. But it's still at like 424, so that's good. And I have a usage for it in EDH. We have Mausoleum Secrets. 2 mana. Yeah, $2. You need to have things in the graveyard. You need to have yeah, creatures there. Ritual of Soot. $1. Not worth it. Blood. I can't write tonight. Blood Operative. No value. Midnight Reaper. Also no value. Didn't think anything different. However, quasi duplicate. So yeah, it's a copy. So nope. Yeah, it only copies the creature that you control, so that's not good. Mission briefing. I know that's 824. Yeah, I know that because I traded it against a friend of mine who gave me a Sacred Foundry. We have Drowned Secrets. Whenever you cast a blue spell, yep. I thought so, no value. Not gonna get played. This one's definitely not gonna get played. Hatchery Spider. It's too expensive. It's 7 mana. Vivid Revival. I thought so as well. Again, too expensive. It's 5 mana and you get 3 multicolored back. Beast Whisperer. Again, 4 mana. It's too expensive, right? Yep. It's just $1, so it's too expensive to play in. Yeah, it's standard. Let's see. Light of the Legion. 21, I thought as much, but this one is going in my Angel deck. That I am building. We have Dawn of Hope. That might be a thing. Dawn of Hope. Nope, it is not. It's only half a buck. Citywide, citywide bust. Probably nothing because it only destroys creatures that are big, and I thought as much. We have Mr. Legion War Boss. He is actually something, and of course no one is selling a pre-release Legion War Boss. I have my doubts about Erratic Cyclops. 1, it costs 4 mana. 2, it's easy to get rid of, and I thought as much. It is not even half a buck. It's a quarter. It's just a quarter. It's 25 cents. We have Runaway Steamkin. 2 mana, I guess $3. We can, sure, we'll put it in a sleeve. We have the Arclight Phoenix. 4 mana for a flying haste. Almost $2. And then lastly, we have Risk Factor. Yeah, not really surprised, but also I thought it would maybe be more. 3 mana, the opponent takes 4 damage or you draw 3 cards. But such is life, and we will never know why. So I would say this has been a rather acceptable card cracking, yeah, pack cracking. We will go into arena in just a little moment. Just gotta start it up and get ready. Let's see, there's Steam, Magic the Gathering. Yeah, I run it through Steam. I like using Steam, so why not? So according to the codes here, they say it's a limit of 1 per account. So I don't know if I can use both the codes, but if in the case that I can't, I might maybe tweet out or send it on Facebook or anything. The second code, I have 2 of them, so yeah. There's also the code of Play Ravnica, which is a a code that anyone and everyone can use. It will net you 3 boosters, so that's basically $4 of value in the game. So let's see now. We have game, hopefully. So I'm going to wait until it actually shows something, and in the meantime I can clean a little bit up here. So it's been an okay an okay day with an okay pack opening. So I'm wondering which would be best, Amara or Trostani. Sure, Amara costs 2 mana, Trostani costs 5, but they're both pretty good. Also wish I had Etrada, then I would make an Etrada deck. I didn't even get any I didn't even get Isoni or Raska or any like Golgari legends. Also, just while we're at it, I am doubting Impervious Great Worm is gonna be worth anything at all. But you never know unless you check. Impervious Great Worm. It's 10 whole mana. And it's actually 26 bucks. What? It's almost worth more than my expropriate. And yes, I have an expropriate in my binder. So let's see. We are now in the game. We have some also, Singleton is still in action. And draft starts in 42 hours. So, first off, we'll go to the game. I will redeem a code. I will start with Play Ravnica. YAU. Redeemed successfully. Let's open some more packs. We get our wild card. We get expansion explosion. And bounty. So now we get to play a free Guilds of Ravnica ticket entry. Yes. So let's see what we Oh god, there's literally no experimental frenzy. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play the top card of your library. You can't play cards from your hand, and you can play 4 to destroy it. So we have Light of the Legion, but we also have Find Finality. We'll see what else we get. So what do we have here? We have a bunch of Boros cards. We have this. We have Fresh Faced. We have the Hardcast Forecasts of Golgari. We also have the Pinless Gorgon and Status Statue. We have Artful Takedown, Whispering, Notion Ring, Discovery Dispersal, Darkblade Agent, and Siege Bomb. I love the flavor text for Siege Bomb. Suddenly, all the haggling didn't seem so important. So we have lots of white. I think white would be one of the best ones, and with white we have 2 choices, or we could splash. We can go with white and have Boros. We have some really good Boros cards here, and we can splash in green as we have one. We have this one. We can have green. Fresh Face Recruit is a good card. We have this Shield Mate. We have Wood Shaper. Joint Shields is really good. Saw it in action today. We could take Celestia Locket. So we have 10 cards left. We barely have any 1 cost. We have this, that's good. We also have Hunted Witness, which is a good card. We need some removal. Again, removal. Green and red. Green and red. Green and, well, red and green. Now we're about the same with 1 and 2 costs, so that's also not too good. We can also have a Bargain Sergeant, that's a really good card. We can have a Fog. Hexproof. You can't cast non-creature spells. Null Hide Ferox loses all abilities until end of turn. So they can Yeah, any player may activate that ability. I can do it to cast non-creature spells, and the opponent can do it for it to lose hexproof, basically. We have this. We can have a big thing. Find on status. Find status in Gorgon. We also have a guild gates. But no, wait, that doesn't get. Okay, yeah, that's right. It has that thing. But that also means we have less ready cards. We could have two of it. The game Death Touch. But Pitiless Gorgon has Death Touch. I'm not gonna have a swamp for it. Not really good like this. We also have guild gates. There we go. And one more. There we go. I also saw this one, but it's not a good one. Two cards. Hopefully in 2 and 3 costs. I had Maniacal Rage. It was working very well. So let's go with that. Okay, so we have a deck now. We have a Naya deck. Let's try it at least. Yeah, that is the least we can do. So we have a hand. Our opponent goes first. We don't really have a hand we want to keep, but we'll keep it anyways. Because I play for fun. just like my first game today. I wanted to let someone left. Oh. Ooh, I want to try that. Well, it's a little better, but we're kind of missing a very needed, very much needed color. We are missing the white to play this. Okay, get my stuff through. Still don't have enough mana for hunting Christmas. Play the game already, dude. And of course I don't have the mana to do anything else. So are you gonna is it like a destroy target task feature? Or do you have price of pay? Oh, okay. That's sweet. Probably shouldn't have done. We'll see. So that's 5 damage next turn. And I have none. Great. Yep, still nothing. I gotta continue. That was maybe not. You can have the shield made because it is very nice. However, we don't need any basic forests. Let's see. Red and white non-lands. Mentor is really good. We can have another maniacal raid. We have this, and there we go. We'll play another one. fresh face and we have shield mates. We can keep go with Bora's shield mate and then we Really? Not that it matters, it would die from these, but from fail, sure. Screw you. Ow. Then I'm going to do the plane now. Go to come. Wait, he's a blue, he could have a counter spell. Another one. They both fall under white creatures. Just one attack. Okay. Fine with this. I am. I really am. Ah, I forgot to take out the locket. This one, if he casts an instant or sorcery, that's gonna be 8 damage. If he gets a flyer, he can block it. Ah. But that's still just... Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm not really good at this. I didn't really... No, yeah. But yeah, I never claimed that I was good at deck building. Even say to myself, well, I say it myself, I am very bad at deck building. We have turn one. We also have turn. This is the same guy. We also have a turn 3. I'll find the thief of sanity. Yeah. Here, have some cards. Well, have a card. Fresh face and garrison stock. Okay. Yeah. Damage. If he attacks with it. Okay. Oh yeah, you are good. Went very well. We had a very strong beginning. Let's open that. Yes. Narcomoeba. Oh yeah, that's the one that he was playing on the first turn there. That's not bad. We also have enough gold. First one. Demonic betrayal. exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards. You may cast those cards this turn, and you may spend mana, so hit for mana of any type to cast those spells. That's a fun card. So, wait. Yeah, that's right. This is gone. Amon Cat and Hour of Devastation is gone. And so is Ether Revolt and Kaladesh. So it's Ixalan, Rivals of Ixalan, Dominaria, Corset, and Guilds of Ravnica. That is standard legal card. So let's go back into this. So currently we have 600 gems and 3 packs as our prize pool. 100 or is it 1,000? I don't know. Oh god, and I go first? We'll start with the plains and a mountain, and then we'll go with the fresh. Yay, higher quality. More fresh face to recruit. I'm probably gonna lose this, but not gonna be too pessimistic. Oh yeah, still forgot about the rest. There, take 2. You do 1, I do 2. I'll take it back with fight. It's a story locket. Alright. Are you not gonna go? Oh. I don't have any gates. I know, it's like an old habit. I should cast creature spells on my end step. It's always fun to see when people are manually tapping their mana. Well, this is first strike anyways, so. Wait, I have to witness and end our turn. And then we will knife. Comes this one. Yes, this. Oh. Hey, I was gonna crack this. Oh, I don't have the mana to crack it. Then I can do this. And this. Well, actually, let's not hit with that. Let's hit with this. Great. Okay. Good trade. So that's double. Oh right, he has that now. I'm gonna save my double strike and my first strike. My fly. Although I could go with my double strike. Well, at least that would kill it. Like it depends on my double strike. So I'm just gonna slowly chip away. The reason it stops up when it's like his priority is because he has the veiled shade. Tap to charge, tap to pump. Just chip away at your life a little faster. None of the elders would get to do it. Yeah, I thought as much. Push my double strike on it. Finally. Pump. No. Oh well. Bullshit! Necrotic wound. That's actually not bad. It's a one cost. Or I can just slowly chomp away at it. Thought that was gonna be a lot, but yeah, seems like I 6 to 12, and then it's 14, 16 to 220. Okay, so we're at 3 wins. We're probably gonna. I know, still pessimistic about it because I know I am not good at deck building. Guild gates. Okay, I'm gonna hold that I get. Okay, I'm gonna hope that I get another plate. Still not a plate. There's the players I was looking for. Just gonna chip away my heart. Okay. I thought as much. And then I'm gonna call prison nuts. I can't chip away. But I can't. No, I cannot do enough damage. Wait, I can. No, wait. No, that's not it. I need to do it like that, but then I can okay, yeah. I'm actually fine with that. That went better than I expected. Let's open some packs. Let's crack them packs. Beast Whisperer. Oh, SWAT cutter. Ah, the forum, yay. Let's see if I doubt it will work, but we can see. EPJTBYI1UE. Okay, So whoever watches this, that's a free code for you. And then you can play a game of Guilds of Ravnica. Unless I'm gonna give it away. Dude. So let's go back into the game and find something fun. Dex change on my Dimir singleton deck. Because I did get lots of more stuff. We also have Disdainful Stroke. It's a good but this is very much about surveilling and all that kind of things. But a good counterspell is always a good counterspell. So let's see. We have this thing. I guess I can try to build an essence deck. At some point. Oh yeah, I'm just gonna quickly check Disdainful Stroke. I like to keep things like in the same guild or like in the same set. Ooh. So let's see. That's one of the things I don't like there. There's no filter for just sets. So I need to like, okay, this is there, this is this. This is a good one. I also have this in the deck. So this is a singleton deck for this that I have built to, yeah, reflect. Yeah, give me here. I'm trying to keep it on. I don't know. On flavor. So it's not gonna have like undergrowth, but it is gonna have like, yeah, I have this thing because it has surveil. There's this guy. Whenever you surveil for the first time each turn, Whispering Snitch deals 1 damage. I don't think there's much more. There's Deadly Visits. It also has Surveil. So from playing this in the closed beta, I got Teferi. There's also Vraska and Ral. Alright, I remember on Command Zone someone was playing Yargle. Yargle! I have Spybug, that's good. I have these. This thing. Also Rona. Yeah, there's Raw. This, yeah, this at Viceroy. There we go. Vraska, Golgari Queen. So she's the Golgari. Yeah, the Golgari Queen. I don't really have anything here that's like fitting. Other than that, we have the lands. I could probably put in the Guild Mages Forum. What I need to do. And then we have Buddhas. But I'm gonna call this for today. It's been very fun. So, and I do have a pre-release to go to tomorrow as well. So I will see you all next time, probably tomorrow, as I will go over all the cards I will get then. So yeah, good night everyone, and have a good one.